Welcome back to the channel. So the workbench is all cleaned off, so that can only mean one thing. We're going to start a new project today. So the engine that we're going to start building is we're going to do another steam engine, and it's called the Elmer's number 33 mill engine. So this is out of a book, and there's different chapters in it that gives different plans for different engines, and this is chapter 33. So it's referred to as the Elmer. Elmer is the gentleman who did the book, who did the plans. So it's referred to as the Elmer 33 mill engine. And you can see here what it's going to look like. So I'm going to put a link to the plans down in the description, or if you've got a chance to buy the book, there's a book that has more plans in it. I don't have the book, but I would like to have the book someday. It's got a lot of different engine designs in here. So the prints, there's not a single print for one component. There's several components on the same print, so it gets a little busy, but we'll work our way through it. And there's only 3 pages for the prints, and then there's some suggestions when you make the different components there, kind of how to make them. So to make this a little more interesting or challenging, so I was on the Smokestack, it's smokstack.com website the other day, which is it's a wonderful website for full-size hit and miss engines and tractors and steam engines and just a lot of different engines in general. There's a small section on there for scale model engineering. So there was a user that had posed the question of if he could build the Elmer 33 mill engine with just a lathe. He says he has shop limitations and he doesn't have room to put in a milling machine, that he only has a lathe. So there was some people that had said, hadn't actually done it, but had said, yeah, that they thought it could be done. So that's what I've decided to do here, is to attempt to build this engine just using the lathe and a drill press. He states that he also has a drill press, and then we will be cutting some material out with a bandsaw, but basically not using the milling machine. So in order to do that, and I kind of feel like that's the way that these plans are written, because part of these plans discuss using a milling attachment on the lathe. So I think this will be possible using a milling attachment on the lathe, which I don't have a milling attachment for the Smithy lathe, but I've got a plan of something that we can use. When we get to that point, I'll show you what that's going to look like. I've got a plan of what we can use to kind of simulate what a milling attachment would look like. So we're going to attempt to build this engine with just the lathe, and it'll be interesting on some of the setups. I think we can use the faceplate in a lot of cases to set some stuff up, to do some boring. But with any project, we start by going through the scrap bin and gathering up some material. So I've got a little bit of material here that we'll start with, that will eventually turn into the engine. So I'm going to start on the base here. There's a floor, and then there's a sub base, and then there's a base here. So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up, start on these base pieces. So first thing we're going to do is lay this out for the base, and then we will start with the bandsaw. So any good project starts. So you can see the floor here. So we'll start laying the floor out, and the base and the sub base, and then we're going to get these roughed out to size on the bandsaw, and then we will go over to the lathe to start setting up an attachment to do some milling with on the lathe, and then we'll get these squared up to dimension, to size, overall dimensions on the lathe, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so we're over here at the lathe now, and like I said earlier, we're attempting to build this engine using just a lathe and not a milling machine. So if you are limited on space or budget, either one, and you only had a lathe, I think you can still build this engine, but that's what we're trying to figure out. So in order to do that, you need some kind of milling attachment to go on your lathe. Now this one's going to look a little different than yours if you have just a lathe. They make milling attachments that go on the tool post holder, but I'm doing it a little bit different. So what I've come up with is I've got an XY table here, and then I've made this bracket to mount it to my table. So then that will allow us to mount a vise to the table, and then I've got my collet chuck on here, and I've got an end mill in the collet chuck. So that will allow us to move the table with the cutter running, and then because this is on a XY table, we can adjust the height here. You need some way to be able to adjust the height to where the cutter is or where you want to cut at. So then we can adjust this height to where the cutter is. Then we can move the table in and then move the table across and make a cut. So I think this is going to work. We're going to give it a try, and then if it works, we're going to go ahead and square up. This is the base, and then we have the sub base that we cut out, and then I'm going to go ahead and square up a piece of aluminum for the cylinder, and then there's two lugs that go on the bottom of the sub base. We'll go ahead and square that up, and then we're going to go ahead and square up some pieces for the bearings. They're 5/16 thick, and the piece that I have is 3/8 for the side, so we're going to machine that down to 5/16 and then get it to dimension for the bearings. So let's see how this goes. Okay, so that worked really well doing the milling in the lathe. I got a 1" by 1" piece here milled for the cylinder. And then we've got 2 pieces here for the bearings. These I left a little bit tall. And we've got the base plate, machined to size, and the sub base. And then I've machined the 2 slots in the bottom for these, which are lugs that'll be bolted down to. And then we've got the base, which the base I ended up doing with a file just because it's so thin. I was afraid that it would want to chatter and vibrate too much. So I ended up just cleaning it up with a file. So we got a lot of pieces made here, but the next thing that I'm going to do before we start getting all this bolted down is in the base. There is a 1 1/4 inch radius here. It's machined in, and this is clearance for the flywheel. You can see the hidden lines here. Sorry, this is clearance for the crankshaft is what I meant, for the web on the crankshaft. So we're going to machine that in next, and I've got a 2.5 inch cutter that I think I can use if I can get it mounted in the collet chuck, and then get this mounted in the vise, and then we're going to machine out this notch here for the crankshaft. Okay, so that went really good. I was able to cut that slot. With the 2.5 inch diameter cutter. So that'll give us clearance for the throw on the crankshaft. So that's going to go in there like that. And our cylinder will bolt here. And then our bearing plate will bolt here and here. So far it looks like we're going to be able to make this with just using the lathe and then the milling attachment that I came up with to use on this on the Smithy. So I think that's going to do it for this episode. So come back next time, and we're going to start bolting these pieces down to the base plate and getting the other holes in here and getting the bearing mounts and everything mounted to the plate. Thanks for watching.